Good morning. This is the Safe House Project webinar series. My name is Alia Azariah. I'm Director of Aftercare for Safe House Project. I'm also a survivor. And the webinar series is a place where we as an organization bring conversations that we're privileged enough to have as a national organization to the rest of the field. So I felt a few years ago like, we are not by any means the experts in all ways, but we know a lot of experts in a lot of different fields. And a lot of our different agencies that we work with had needs that we were not able to fill, but we knew people who could. And the webinar series is our way of bringing some of those conversations that we are privileged enough to have to you all who are day in and day out working to serve survivors and may never get to cross paths with people who might be able to answer some questions that you have, start conversations. Our series is never meant to be full trainings. Any one of our topics really could be a day or 3-day long training in and of itself. So it's just the start of a conversation and pointing you towards more people who might be able to continue that conversation to you or broaden your ideas of what's possible and what's happening in the anti-trafficking field. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Super excited to introduce our webinar and our panelists for today. So again, my name is Alia Azariah. I'm Director of Aftercare for Safe House Project, and we are in the Safe House Project webinar series. We're going to talk about private intelligence as a lawful ally, how to enhance anti-trafficking efforts through responsible collaboration. I'm really excited to talk to you all about the organizations that are here today, the work that they do. They're not the only ones doing this work. These are organizations, though, that I can say that I've worked with personally, with a family member, a 12-year-old family member that I had that was being exploited. And I've seen the work front and personal of what they have done for actually multiple youth that I've referred to some of these agencies and have had really positive experiences with. So excited to get to kind of talk about maybe what that looks like, dispel some myths about what that looks like, and talk about how those resources can be helpful. So I'm going to start with introductions. Let's start with Major Ben Gatros. He was the staff judge advocate for the 139th Airlift Wing in St. Joseph, Missouri. He was responsible for providing legal advice to commanders and service members, advising on civil court issues, immigration matters, legal reviews, and providing assistance with legal research. He received direct commission as a Reserve Air Force judge advocate. His last assignment lasted approximately 6 years. In his civilian career, he's in-house counsel for a private foundation, E3, that supports law enforcement with the location and recovery of missing and exploited children. And prior to this position, he was a special agent for the United States Department of Homeland Security, where he spent over a decade working human trafficking investigations and cross-borders narcotics trafficking. So thanks, Ben, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And excited to also introduce you all to Maddie and Pastor Rudy from CERT Ministries. They were founded by Pastor Rudy and his family 22 years ago. Pastor Rudy is a former U.S. Recon Marine and police officer. CERT is made up of former military special operators, law enforcement, and medical professionals who are all 100% volunteer and live across America. They're a small ministry team with individuals that have the special skill sets to go into all of the world to help people out of trapped situations, from missing and exploited children nationally and internationally. They do whatever they can to bring hope and freedom where it's needed. They often interface with international governments to both local and federal law enforcement in the U.S. They're formed as a church and overseen by the Slave Free Project, an awareness and action organization that offers individuals information on how to recognize, respond, and report the signs of human trafficking. They're based out of Southern California, like myself, and operate worldwide. The help is completely free of charge to those they serve, and they're supported financially by very generous private donors. So thank you, Maddie and Pastor Rudy, for joining us also.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. So let's let's start by just defining some of the role that you guys serve through the work that you do. Can you explain the primary mission of your organizations and how it supports anti-trafficking efforts? Ben, let's start with you.
All right, thank you. You know, the NGO aspect of counter trafficking work really got driven home to me over that decade where I worked counter trafficking with Homeland Security. There were a lot of times where we would get an outcry victim, or we would conduct an operation. We would recover either a child or a young lady, or even a young lady that's an adult but has a minor child, and the resources were just so limited. And I remember our bosses saying, well, you got to figure out what to do with them. And you would have a young lady crying on your floor with a baby that needed formula and diapers. And she had just outcried against her trafficker and maybe even told you where another victim was that you could go recover. And the resources were so limited. And the boss would be like, well, you can't spend your money because that'll make the case no good. And the defense will use that against us. So start calling churches. And I'm like, well, boss, it's like 2 a.m. on a Saturday. Where are we going to get a church? So there early on, if you work trafficking, and everybody on this webinar knows it, there's just these huge gaps between those charged officially through their official capacity to go locate and recover survivors and get people out of that victim situation, and then what you can do for them afterwards. And certainly didn't know you then, or my life would have been a lot easier. And so that's when I was recruited over to help work on this side of things. That was one of the things that was presented to me that drew me into working with E3, is to be that gap filler for law enforcement, to never say no if somebody needs housing, food, shelter, diapers, and start rebuilding the person so that you can actually have a case. And so I say all that to say we've brought in a lot of former and current law enforcement and people from different disciplines to be that gap filler, so that where law enforcement either doesn't have the intelligence or the information to go recover someone, or after they've recovered someone or we've worked with them to collaboratively recover someone, we can pick up and run with that individual, child if necessary, usually adult, and fill those gaps so that there can be healthy and healing recovery for that individual, and then the law enforcement can do their side on the prosecution and follow up. So we try to fill those gaps.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Maddie or Pastor Rudy?
Let's start off with Maddie.
Well, yeah, thank you for having us. It's good. I see some organizations in the chat that we've actually gotten to work with in the past, so it's good to see everybody. And yeah, thanks for hosting this. I think, sir, the best way to describe what we do, like I said, like sometimes people say, oh, you guys are that trafficking organization. Like, no, we don't actually traffic anybody. It's not what we do. We're an anti-trafficking organization that helps people out of trap situations. So that expands to all different things. We don't only find missing and exploited kids, but it is a really big thing that we do when we're in the States. Most of our work is in Southern California, and I think that that's why we love it here, and that's why we have a heart for it. And I know that California's laws and things that are happening are nuts, but I think that the fight really is here, and that's why we're here. So the miracles that we see, I always say that we get to see nightmares turned into fairy tales of just, we meet people on their worst day. It's never a good thing to get a call from a family member of a missing kid, and that's where our team thrives, is to see what we can do when nothing's happening. And so whether that's bridging the gap between families, law enforcement, medical professionals, just everybody in between, we try to make things happening when things aren't happening. So whatever we can do with our special skill sets that we have, whether it's just ministering to people on their worst day, like Ben had said, that need just an extra hand, we always like to say, what does help look like to you? So whether it's a girl we meet out on the street, or a minor that we find, or an officer that's overwhelmed, or a girl that goes missing from a program, or someone that comes into the emergency room that doesn't have a way out and doesn't want to go back to their trafficker, we just see what we can do. So the realm of work we do is big, but our team is small and mighty. So yeah, Pastor Rudy, who's also my dad, so I might call him dad in this, and explain a little more.
Yeah, to kind of finish up with that too, is we are formulated as a church for the main reason that we believe that if a child goes missing, the first place other than the police that you should be able to go is the church. And the Bible defines the church as the body of Christ fitly joined together, providing the needs of one another. So really not just putting it to, a mission statement on a website, but actually putting boots to the ground and doing what's needed. And sometimes, and I know this is kind of a segue into your next question, but law enforcement always at first, when they don't know us and we have to build that relationship, is like, it's too dangerous for you to go in there. And I always think about when I used to be a cop, the way I was doing police or community type policing is, if somebody went missing or I was looking for somebody, I utilized the churches as assets. Like, do you know where this person is? Because they're the eyes and the ears of the community. And so really becoming that bold church in places where others fear to tread and stand in a way that is helpful and not harmful to an investigation, but also putting the victim first is the most important thing, and the victim over the investigation rather than the investigation over the victim. And looking at how we can, like Maddie said, minister to everyone that's involved. And that's ministering to the child that's missing, or, the parents of that child, or even the law enforcement officers that are frustrated because they may feel like they have a lack of resources. So being there to bridge that gap.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So how do you, as a private citizen, right, define that role like within the lawful boundaries? So how do you walk that line as private citizen, but still definitely doing investigative work, right, to find kids and adults? How do you walk that line?
Well, I think the important thing is to know that we are not law enforcement. So we don't, as far as our organization goes. So we don't pretend to be, even though we do have the skill set and the understanding about how law enforcement works. And so many of our operators or people come from different disciplines in the intelligence community that know how to blend into certain environments and to develop assets. So the assets could be in different ways of meaning human intelligence, getting there, talking to people that are street level, understanding who the main players are in the environment, and then also looking at digital assets as far as OSINT technology, going out there, looking at social media or different data groups that are out there that we can collect and understand where people are. So when we do that, those are a lot of the things that law enforcement will do, but we do it on a different way. So if we're a community church group that goes in and, let's say, sets up a barbecue in an area, it's a great way to be able to collect and understand and see people who are there. Now, for us, one of the things is it's really important, because I know there's been a lot of failures with groups that have operated or wanted to operate in the ways that we do because of that. Like and I'm going to try to say this without, bad talking in a situation, but looking at the failure points and how we've stayed out of it, because there are very few groups that have been around for 22 years. Usually the lifespan of a group is right around that 3 to 4 year mark before there's something that comes forward as some sort of misconduct as far as money goes, or use of force, or something that goes along those lines. And for us, it's very important that we stay biblical, is the way that we put it. We follow the rules of the Bible, which are very important. Those are our governing documents. And if we stay within that, we're not taking over a law enforcement role. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't act if we need to, if law enforcement does not go through with the recovery of a child. Let's say, and I'm going to be really careful with the explanation of this. So we'll never recover a child that we don't have authorization to recover, meaning that if a parent contacts us and they sign our waiver that we have consent to recover their child, if law enforcement won't pick up that child, then we will. And we'll do that because we're working on the behalf of that the parent or whoever the legal guardian is. So we won't go and recover a 14-year-old against their will if we don't have parental consent. So for us, we always work alongside of law enforcement, giving them the first opportunity to be able to recover that child. But we're not going to let the child to continue to go and be in danger if law enforcement doesn't act. So for us, it's really important that communication is key. And that's communicating with law enforcement partners, trying to build those relationships, and trust is probably the most important part of that, is getting them to trust and understand what we do. And understanding what our capabilities are. And when that happens, you really can operate as a private citizen, because a private citizen has every right to surveil, to be anywhere that you have the freedom to be, including public property. So even if it's a bad neighborhood and maybe gangs think that they own that neighborhood and law enforcement were to tell us that's too dangerous for you to go in there, that doesn't mean that it's illegal for us to go in there. It just means that they're worried about us and our presence being in a place where they think we might get hurt. Which for me, and I'm just going to drop that in there, it's sometimes troublesome for us to think they're more concerned about a 55-year-old combat veteran than they are for this 13-year-old girl that's being raped repeatedly in that neighborhood. Like, you would think that their concern should be more for her safety than my safety, but that's something that we can discuss later if you want in more detail. But Ben, I'll defer to you for the rest of how you guys operate
No,
along those lines.
I appreciate that. Really, just to break ours down pretty simply, we do have people on our team that are still active law enforcement. If we're within one of our collective jurisdictions from one of our members, then they can operate within however their agency policies allow and whatever their supervisor blesses off on. When we are remote and traveling, either pursuing a missing child or assisting in a proactive operation, or even one that's planned, or a reactive operation, we kind of fall into one of two categories. We're often invited in as investigative advisors. And so we're there to bring our experience, bring our different team members' perspectives and skill sets to that department where we're invited in. Oftentimes that'll entail, if it's something that's planned, training. And so in that regard, we've been invited in more of an official role in our law enforcement capacities. And then if it's just not that level of trust, Rudy talked about, you have to have that trust, or you just really can't bridge that gap to information share always. Then we'll come in more like a source of information, and any analyst that's working on that case, or anyone that's helping investigate that case within their investigative circles, we can bring that information to law enforcement as a source of information. That's something that most law enforcement, good patrol officers, good detectives, they recruit sources, they recruit informants. And so that's something that doesn't rock the boat too much, coming in and providing the information. A lot of times, if you don't have a good relationship, you have to provide it with no strings attached, and you just kind of have to hope you know where it goes. But if you have a good enough network, sphere of influence, and professional contacts, then you can usually work more integrally. But that first go round, it's a lot of giving, a lot of sharing, and you're putting a lot of faith out there, hoping that it'll be reciprocated once you get checked out. People call and check on you. People call your other professional contacts and check on you.
Thank you, guys. That was great. So we kind of already answered this next question, so maybe I'll skip, and you touched a little bit about this. You really just touched on it, Ben, but wondering if any of you, the rest of you, have other thoughts on how you maintain that collaboration with law enforcement while operating, like you're definitely operating, to intentionally like avoid any perception of vigilantism. Because I think that's the thing that I get pushback when I like encourage law enforcement to use you guys as a resource. I often get like, well, can you do it? And then tell us what they say, right? But because there is this perception of well, they're just taking everything into their own hands and they're not following this. And we've run in, I know, Sir has in an operation that like I watched you guys do. There was definitely this like, well, you need to follow the protocol, but there was this, the protocol was never being activated. So do you have any other thoughts on how you maintain that collaboration?
I think what Ben said is really important, is to go into a situation not expecting anything other than them to do their job. So not expecting like even to know where the information that you provide goes. And I always tell them on, the first time I get to meet a law enforcement officer, or, let's even say one of their administrators, that we're like a crystal ball. We're going to be able to give information that's going to lead to evidence, but we're not here as a law enforcement agency or working as an agent to provide that evidence that's going to lead to an arrest. And we always let them know too, our main purpose is to see that this child is recovered and this child is recovered safely. And so the more we give, the more trust that we get. And I always tell our operators or the people that are involved in our organization, we can be right 99 times, but if we're wrong once, we lose all credibility. So we have to be 100% on the information that we give. We can't give maybes. We have to give 100%. We know that this is legitimate information, not just something that we have a good feeling about. So professionalism goes really far, and sticking to our past training that we've gotten from those different disciplines that we come from on that information and how we acquire it. It's important also to mostly give that information of where we acquired it. They may not want that. Like we get a lot of, hey, I got this information, but I kind of want to know what it is, but I don't want to know where you got it, which that starts to build that trust also, because then you get to see where they're at. I'll usually know within the first 5 minutes of meeting a law enforcement contact whether or not they are going to be helpful, and they're going to shut down. And a lot of our contacts come from outside agencies. For example, and this will kind of go into your next one, but let's say Sacramento PD will contact us saying, hey, we have somebody missing in a Southern California law enforcement agency area, and we're getting no feedback from them at all. Can you help? And so we'll say, yeah, we can. So that builds trust with Sacramento, so that later on, if we operate in Sacramento, they're like, we know, sir, we've worked with them. They've done a phenomenal job helping us recover this many kids and bringing them back safely, and they're not going to overstep their bounds, and work with them further. So it comes from years of experience, and then also working with partnering organizations like E3, because we'll call each other, hey, do you know somebody here? Do you know somebody there? And then getting those warm contacts or handshakes so that you're not just, vigilante group, whatever. And I think vigilante is it's kind of an interesting term, right? Because the definition of that is a self-appointed group of citizens that fill the gap in an area where law enforcement is seen to be inadequate. So it is really, it's a term that's been used in a negative light. But if law enforcement's not doing something, and this from, with family members, right? If that family member is not getting found, then it's time for somebody to rise up and find them, right? Or hold law enforcement to their job that they're supposed to do. So I think that hopefully that kind of answers the question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. And yeah, I have been able to watch you guys work a little bit through either kids that I've worked with or that family member that you all helped, who's doing fantastic now, which is always great. But would love if you could share a case study where you were able to collaborate effectively with law enforcement and that led to the successful recovery of a survivor. Who wants to start?
Yeah. Let Maddie do it.
Yeah. So I think a good way just to kind of even talk about what Pastor Rudy and Ben talked about is just knowing that what our team is really good at is where to look for information that's out there. So where to look for the people, where are they hurting, where are they being trafficked, where do they go missing? Knowing and becoming an expert in that. It's not any secret squirrely stuff that we do. It's just knowing where people are and what bad guys do to take advantage of them and where kids end up. And so a good case study that is a huge victory that we had this last spring was I was doing a routine check online where girls are advertised and talked about by so many people in Southern California. Just a routine check of the forums where they advertise them for sale. on social media and talk about the latest, youngest girl that's out there. All of this is public information. It's nothing that I can't write a warrant. I can't ping a phone. I can't do any of that. It's just advertised. These people are being sold online and advertised and brutalized. It's out there. It's public info. And so looking at it, saw that bad guys were talking about a 15-year-old girl that came out and was being sold and talking about how people were buying her and how much she was being sold for. When I found out who she was, I did a simple Google search of her name and found that her mom had posted on social media she was looking for her. She was missing out of the Midwest, and we contacted her mom and said, hey, we're a ministry team in Southern California that wanted to see if you needed help looking for your missing child. That was about 8 o'clock at night. By 10 o'clock, she responded and said, my daughter's been gone for 3 weeks. She went out to Southern California for a spring break party. Sure enough, it turned out that she was taken at that party that she came out to and was being sold on one of the worst places, I think, on the planet in Los Angeles, and missing. And so by that time, we were able to find out where she was based off of a picture that was posted, just using Google Street View and knowing the area and knowing exactly what hotel that was. We were able to get in contact with her daughter, and we had her by 10 a.m. She came running down into the car, and we had called federal law enforcement, let them know that this was a kid that was in NCMEC, that the case was out of the Midwest, and we had made contact with the detective there who couldn't get a hold of the detective in that county that we were working. And so they said, if you have parental consent, which we did, if you guys can facilitate the rescue, that would be great. And so we did. We had her, she came running out of that hotel, I'll never forget it, but with her big, beautiful eyelashes, and jumped into the car and just started sobbing and said, thank you so much for finding me. And, you know, she's in clothes that she was being brutalized in, if you can even call them clothes, and able to give her a bag full of brand new stuff and a hug and some tears. We always say that our main ops car, it's a Raptor, and we always say that the Raptors caught a lot of tears. And so, you know, spit out of there, and federal law enforcement called and said, did you guys get her? And we said, yep. And they said, awesome. If you could just send us a summary of what it was, that would be great. We said, we'll do once we're in a safe spot. And so we made it to the airport. She'd never been on a plane before, so we were able to facilitate that. We actually flew with her and escorted her all the way home across the country. So it was great because by 10 o'clock that night, so just 24 hours after 3 weeks missing, we had her back in her mama's arms. And there's nothing like a family reunification where you see just a mom see their kid for the first time after not knowing where they are. Like I always say, like, you might, like, you know what it's like to lose your phone or your keys, or God forbid your car gets stolen. But when your child is missing and stolen, it's a whole nother level of fear. And so just to see those family reunifications, that's where our team thrives. When there's a family who is working within multiple law enforcement jurisdictions and doesn't know how to navigate that, and their kids fall through the cracks, if we're able to push their case forward and talk to law enforcement with them and for them, we're willing to do that and try to find where they're at. So we're able to get her home, and her nightmare ended. So she's doing great. We were able to offer local resources to them, and out of our traffickers and back home to her mama. So that was good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Maddie.
Yeah.
Ben?
Yeah, just tying in just a bit of how you avoid the perception of vigilantism, I think, is definitely over communication, and then getting a supervisor or a higher level supervisor from an agency or department you've worked with before to reach out on your behalf if they're willing to do that. And once you make those good relationships, they will. And then they can explain, look, this group, what they're going to bring is they're going to bring flexible resources, which sadly, a lot of times that just boils down to dollar bills, analysts, because sadly, so many of your smaller police departments and sheriff's offices don't have analysts. They want them, but they're obligated to cover patrols and, you know, keep pushing black and whites around the city versus having an analyst that can focus on stuff. So I say that to say that a lot of the departments, sometimes they're overworked, cases slip through the cracks. We had one here this past year down in Texas, and it came to us through a family member, and the family member was longtime retired federal law enforcement from an agency that works counter trafficking. They'd reported to the metro area down in Texas. And he was like, I don't even know what to do. Nothing's moving on the case. What do you think about this? And we had lunch, and so we took one of our members who's an active detective, just reached out and said, hey, I'm law enforcement. We have a family member in our area. Is there anything we can do to help you with this? Of course, we're a citizen when we're not in our home state or our home jurisdiction. And, that particular detective who caught the case had countless cases, was staring down retirement the next week. And you can imagine where that stacked up in priorities. Just that's sadly the nature of bureaucracies and careers. And once we reached out to him, full carte blanche, I'll take whatever assistance you can provide. And that resulted in our analysts digging in, some of our law enforcement partners and law enforcement members digging in hard. And within about 12 to 16 hours, we had an apartment in New York. And this groomer and potential trafficker had bought her a plane ticket. And at 15, still not sure how she got on the plane, was able to fly to New York, and through collaboration, and then through another member who had very good relationships with a particular agency, called them up. And it's in the middle of the night. And just because of the trust and some individuals, once people know you and you're within a group that people know and the trust is there and people can vouch for you, the vigilantism goes away. You walk them A, B, C, D, E, F, G. This is how we know this. And then they take that independently. And that particular federal agency exigently went into that apartment, recovered that poor young girl, disrobed, in bed with an adult male and she was so happy to get out of there. And then the gap filler part came in when the family, not really, really well to do, we were able to coordinate flights for the parents to get the parents up there immediately. And that short-term police protective custody being there to provide the resources for her. So she's not just sitting in a sterile, police department by herself, to rehumanize that downtime, that waiting time until her parents could get there the next day, and then reunite the family, get them sent back. And then just knowing the network of resources, right? Like all your all's resources and what you do so much for survivors and bringing them back together. And then any other type of counseling. NCMEC has resources for children that are recovered, and making sure that you help rebuild that young life so that that's hopefully the only time that she elopes or gets recruited away, and you can rebuild that family base, and you can help get her healthy again. So that was just a few months ago, and there's a lot of those stories, and it's literally just reaching out and leveraging anyone who's willing to assist, because it's righteous work. And that's, Rudy and I talk, our people talk. You just have to, the old saying, a lot of great things get done when no one cares who gets the credit. That is counter trafficking work. Once someone wants to get credit, it really throws a hiccup in things. You just do the work and lay up your treasures in heaven, I think is how the pastor would say it.
Yeah. And I think I've been able to see kind of both of your organizations do that, really well with my niece, Ben. I got to see you guys support her mom in such an incredible way. And I think that's like the cool thing about nonprofit work, right? Is that it isn't with like law enforcement investigations, their lane is so limited. Like what they're able to do and provide is what is written in their job description, right? And what that agency offers. And like, for instance, with my niece, like I saw you guys, really support her mom as well with that recovery. And that recovery was like another, like what, you got the information the day before, and the next day, I think we were able to have her. And then, Maddie getting to, watching the advocacy, like not end at recovery, right? Like seeing you guys stay in the hospital for, I don't know how many days with that kiddo, when we called, I don't know how many agencies to try and activate a advocate to come sit and watch and sit and be with her when she maybe didn't even want you there most of the time for another youth, or getting to reach out to Maddie just for intel, like there's been times that I've, with us being in the same area, have gotten to connect with Maddie and just be like, hey, they're looking for her, but they don't know. And I think that's part of the thing is it's not, there have definitely been times where I think all of us on this call have encountered law enforcement who don't, maybe who aren't as passionate about these kids or these adults as we are, and don't have the same drive to do the work in the way that we do. And then there's other times where maybe they have that, but they have too much on their plate, or they don't understand this field and the not just the anti-trafficking space, but the actual trafficking space, as well as people who've been doing this day in and day out of passion for so long. And so they don't know where to look for information, even when they are actively looking, or when we're looking for kids that maybe this is their 20th time going missing. And so the same amount of vigor does not go in to the search for them and what's happening to them as maybe it did on their first, second, or third time that they had gone missing, right? And so in knowing that we kind of have the gambit of law enforcement that are available to work with these kids, what are some of the challenges that you've faced with collaborating with law enforcement, and how have you worked to navigate those things?
I can take a quick stab at it and then pass it off. Sometimes if you're working in a small jurisdiction where you've tracked a kid to, and step one is make sure they're reported with NCMEC, calling, and any of the agencies you're working with, if they can confirm that there's a runaway warrant for them, so any law enforcement can pick them up and detain them, is really important. But you might show up in a jurisdiction that has 2 patrol deputies on, off hours, evening, weekend, and they're blacked out, or they've had some type of a domestic, and there's no law enforcement there. And, one of the potential landmines is you're in a particular city, you're in a particular county, they can't respond. And so then you have to go to the next level up, and you might have to hit up the state, or you might have to hit up a federal agency. That's a landmine. And so there isn't always a right answer. Sometimes you just have to put the time in on the back end to explain what happened, go have a meeting with some supervisors afterwards, because obviously, if that child is in danger, is actively being sold, actively being trafficked, especially if you're in a state where either the parents haven't given you permission to safeguard their child, or the state doesn't authorize you the ability to safeguard that child and then immediately call the police. Missouri, my home state where I'm post-certified, does allow that for adults to do that. In California, if you pick up, even if they're in a dangerous situation, if it's a state child and you pick them up and transport them an inch, you're in a lot of trouble. So at that rate, you have to keep working within the systems and keep elevating it. But the landmines you always have to try to avoid are those political landmines, maybe between departments that don't always work well together. And then it can take a lot of trips and a lot of time on the back end to educate, apologize, feed, and then rebuild that relationship. But that can be. So, when you talk about vigilantism, or people getting upset, or agencies getting upset, the potential is always there, and you have to be aware of it, and you have to do everything you can to heal it on the back end, even if you're like, but what we did was truly righteous. Yeah, it was, but you need to rebuild that relationship for the next child and the next time. So education over communication, and a lot of transparency, even when it kind of makes us uncomfortable.
That was great. Thank you, Ben. Maddie, your path to reading.
Yeah, I think it's one of those where I like to, and the best experiences I have is working from the bottom up rather than the top down. And it goes from what, Ben was talking about. Nobody cares. If you go in there with the idea that you don't care who gets the credit, and you want law enforcement to be elevated, then, and not have your name attached to anything. There's so many groups that go out there, and before the child, the parents even notified that they're found, they're already doing some sort of a social media post that the child was found, because they want their logo on the found poster. With us, hopefully nobody even knows that we were there. And so what we try to do is find that one, and my sweet spot that I think is the best is that sergeant or corporal within a department that's been there for 20 years and really cares. He's not fed up with his job. He goes to work every day because he, when back in the day, he wanted to make a difference. And so giving him the opportunity to do his job and elevate him really goes a million miles. And then, nobody else in the department even needs to know that we helped facilitate that. And that child gets recovered within the proper channels, which is important. If you get that one guy that's a little bit of a stinker, that's the opposite, then, and like Ben, so Major Ben, I'm gonna keep calling him Major Ben now, but as Major Ben put together, that landmine that you hit and it was unexpected, where this person turns pretty quickly and almost as an enemy rather than an ally in trying to recover this child, then submitting really quickly kind of throws them off guard. So putting your alpha and putting it in your pocket where you don't have to be the alpha in the situation and kind of bowing down, but using a different way to manipulate him to the end goal, which is important, by letting them know the liability that they could be in trouble for in a really easy way, helps go a million miles. Like, now, is your badge cam recording? Great, because I want to make sure that this is all on video, that you're refusing to go to this address where this child that I just gave you is possibly at. And letting them know, because if I walk away from there, because we're going to stay here as long as we're legally in a public area of eyes on until that child is brought to safety. But if you could go ahead and do what you need to do while your badge cam is on and kind of pushing them towards that. And then afterwards, giving the platitude back to them, writing a letter of appreciation to that sergeant after the fact that, hey, they actually did recover this child. The child is safe. They did a really good job, and so forth. Sometimes they forget that they weren't going to help you in the first place. So yeah, getting and manipulating those things
I think
in a proper way is important.
the biggest thing is not overselling yourself as an organization.
Yeah.
Never promise that you can't do something if you can't do it. Like, just be who you are. Like, your organization is good enough for whatever lane of the fight you're in. And our CERT team is good at going places that aren't the safest and keeping people safe in those situations, but it's because of years of experience and regular training and knowing that. And we're not the best at aftercare, so we don't do long-term aftercare. Like, we all have a different vein of the fight and knowing how to support each other in that. But I think that's where law enforcement already knows how busy they are and how much of a problem they have, and not overwhelming them, but providing solutions and then respecting boundaries, because they are law enforcement, we're not. And so knowing how to let them know what help we have and not overstepping is really, really important.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna shift gears a little bit because I've seen some really great questions come up either in the chat or here that I think either I don't even know the answer to for you all, or I've kind of I think would apply to a broad range of situations. And so one of them is from Susan. She's wondering, in what instance, I'm going to maybe frame this a little bit differently, but in what instance, or what would be an example of why a law enforcement officer, from your experience, wouldn't just go in and recover a minor that's in these kinds of situations? And Susan's here in Southern California with us also.
Yeah.
So
We had one situation where we had used digital means to track a location. And so the information that we had was via an IP address and through a chat app that was being used. And so with that, the child was communicating still with the parents through a messaging system that we were able to get the location from, and using open source information to be able to do that. So law enforcement said, hey, look, if we go into this certain neighborhood, we're going to get in a shootout. And so we need a positive ID on that child. Like, we have to know, rather than just an IP address, we need eyes on that you see that child there. So that would be one instance. Most of the time, they'll never say, no, we're not going to go in there. They're just may tell you, we don't have the resources to go in there right now. It's going to take us a while. So we've had to sit sometimes up to 6, 8, even days on a location before law enforcement would have the opportunity to be able to go in. There was one situation in Northern California years ago, and that's why I can talk about it now. But it was during the first it wasn't BLM riots at the time. It was in the Oakland area. But the Vice detectives were like, look, we're in riot gear. We can't respond to this location that you have eyes on where these 8 and 9-year-olds are being sold out of a hotel because we're in riot gear. Like the city's on fire. So we can't go rescue these kids because we're trying to keep the police department from burning down. And so we took the next level and tried to elevate that to federal law enforcement. And federal law enforcement said we're on standby to back up that local law enforcement department from keeping their city from burning. And so I told them, okay, what we're going to do is we have a private YouTube channel that we're going to live stream these children being sold because it's happening out in the open to your federal email account until you can move in and recover them. And so they ended up doing an operation. This was, we ended up collecting and sending that live stream to that email for, I think it was up to 5 days where we had a covert position in place. But they finally did. After 5 days, they went in and recovered 6 kids. And they were able to shut down the hotel and do a full investigation. But, it is in a, smaller departments have so much more leeway because they're not as inundated. Some of our large cities, and because of the policies that have been put in place, they're either hobbled where they can't do something, or they're put in a position to where they're trying to stay alive through their shift and get there. And we've seen that a lot. And that's kind of a sad state of law enforcement. And hopefully things will be on the mend here.
From our standpoint, sometimes you can't get that on the ground support if whoever you're sharing with can't track. Kind of like if our team, especially if it's rushed and we're trying to get to a city quickly, the A to B to C to D, here's where the kid is at. If they don't understand kind of our chain of thinking, then that is something that'll sometimes make it hard to get the support rolled out. Usually we can fix that by getting an analyst face to face with either a sergeant or a seasoned investigator, and then they understand that. The other thing that we'll run into a lot is if we're civilians, that Fourth Amendment hard line where, the police, they do have their hands tied on the Fourth Amendment side until we can get them that live streaming footage, or we can get them photos saying, hey, here's the photo, here's the video. Well, you got enough for a warrant, or depending on your policy, you have enough for exigency to go exigently enter this house and safeguard these children. But until you can get them tipped over that scale, the Fourth Amendment keeps them out of that house or out of that hotel room. And it may not be the officer. It could be higher up chain of command. It could be their in-house counsel or their attorneys that are there who they would rather be liability adverse. And they'll say, yeah, you probably could do this under the law, but we're not going to. Go find a judge. Let's see if we can get a judge to sign off this, because if a judge signs a warrant, everybody has qualified immunity. And sadly, you get close to the end of your career and you're like, I got 1 year, 3 months, and 2 days, and then I'm going to retire, and I'm not going to do, even when the loss is big, that sometimes drives the decision making. And departments have been through different investigations. DOJ comes in, they've been sued. And so the Constitution that protects the public also will oftentimes pull the departments back. If someone is in a place purely as a civilian, Constitution guarantees civilians' rights, whereas it restricts the government. So there is a latitude, still completely legal, for civilians to be able to operate, collect more information, go do what they need to do without the same confines and restrictions that our government agencies have. So it's a balance.
It was very helpful. Thank you, both of you.
There was one more I could add real quick, just it's important, is we see a lot of movies that really kind of blow the misconception of law enforcement's authority in even foreign countries. And that's the big one. It's the Brownsville Act with Mexico means that federal law enforcement cannot enact a recovery of an American citizen in Mexico without giving notice to their local law enforcement. So we had a child that was taken out of Southern California long story short, we located her in a cartel-held brothel outside of Mexico City. And if federal law enforcement would have had that location, they would have had to tell the locals where that location is, and the locals were involved. So federal law enforcement is completely hamstrung because they know if they're involved, this child is just going to get moved or sold or taken to another place. So organizations like ours that can operate without that, we're putting ourselves in danger and putting ourselves in the way, but we were able to recover that child and get them back into the United States without notifying the Mexican authorities, because they were involved at the time. So a lot of times that's why federal law enforcement can't do something, is because there is some sort of agreement with that local government or that foreign government that they can't do something. So
Thank you. Another question that I saw come into the chat, and because I think I've watched both of your organizations handle this well, and we all know that this is the case. So what happens when a kid doesn't want to stay put after you have recovered them?
We mitigate the risk of them running. So there's ways to do that, of knowing how to, I mean, just like your family member, Leah, we dedicated and had volunteers that probably, Ben, what were we up to? 8 different cars, escort them to the airport and make it not an intimidating thing, but mitigate bad guys from finding them. Because that's why they want to run, right? Most of the time is that they're scared and they've been threatened, and traffickers have threatened their families, and just provide a safe place of mitigating them from running. So make it as calm and fun as possible, but also recognize that lots of trauma comes within that first, especially 24 hours of being found and rescued, is that you're detoxing, you're scared, you don't know what happened, and explaining like, you're safe, like it's okay, you're safe. But also, when our first place that we usually go is the emergency room, and knowing hospitals and doctors and how to talk and how to watch, because sometimes, even like we talk about law enforcement, like a lot about law enforcement, but we don't talk a lot about the hospital side, and they need training too, and resources and help as well, because a young trafficking victim comes in and they don't know how to ask questions the right way, or don't have a sitter in the room, and so she can just walk right out of the hospital. So just mitigating that risk of them running and making it as fun as possible in the meantime. Lots of times they're hungry. I think that's one of my favorite things, is when we first find a girl, is what do you want to eat? And we get that food at 2 a.m. It's usually chicken nuggets. That's the only thing that's open. But doing that and making it just a safe transition, safe, smooth transition, and having our team in the background providing a safe perimeter to where traffickers can't find them again and know that they're safe.
We have a saying that Waffle House is for winners, and so you only get to go eat at Waffle House at 3 a.m. if you've recovered your girl or your lady. So yeah, you've definitely hit the nail on the head. Food's important. I'm not an expert on the cycles of abuse and trauma, but I've heard it said that a trafficking survivor has the cycle of domestic violence with so many more traumas piled on top of that. And so when that child may stabilize for a while, and then they're running again. They're running back to their trafficker, or a new trafficker recruits them. And so there's a huge psychological component. And I got to sit in Kansas. They're looking at pushing some legislation where I believe it's optional on the first recovery from a trafficking situation, whether the program's initiated. But if they recovered, they elope, and they recovered a second time, they were looking at giving parents, guardians, and the state the option to put them into 30, 60, 90-day psychiatric secure facilities. Not like true, hospital where you're locked in, but where it is a large, secure facility with outside courtyards where the hospital and the healthcare department could come in and provide that victim-centered care treatment approach specific to a juvenile trafficking survivor who needs that time to decompress and come back down. So then you're not, because you'll see detectives get creative and say, man, she's strung out on fentanyl, she's 14, this trafficker keeps taking her. I would rather put charges on her for some type of juvenile delinquency and get her locked down, and then maybe she gets to see a nurse or whatever's provided in that county facility. versus this approach that Kansas is looking at. And I sure hope they adopt it, and that it's going to have state funds. So even parents in custody don't have to give up their child to put them through the program. So they have that 30, 60, 90, 180 days to decompress, get very specific psychological treatment, and it grows into more and more freedom and leeway within the program as they decompress and they're graduated along. Because honestly, at the end of the day, secure facilities are in such short supply. We've chased and recovered the same girl 2, 3, 4 times, and I know Maddie's experience is no different.
I think if I can add the most important thing that we hear on this seminar or whatever it is this panel, that's the name I'm looking for. 96% that we recover with law enforcement efforts go back to the lifestyle. So we'll fight for that 4% all day long. 98% stay out when they do it because they want Jesus. And so our preaching portion of our ministry is probably the most important thing that we do. Putting OSIN aside, putting, all our cool gadgets and cars and team members and everything that we do, if we can get an opportunity to preach the gospel to that person that's been so damaged by somebody else, to know that God can redeem, that he can heal, that they can be completely born again, to leave that life behind and have a new life through Jesus makes everything in a world of difference. Because we can have the best program, and you've seen this, we've all seen this, that's been in this work. We could pull them out of the worst place and take them to a mansion and give them all brand new clothes and $1 million of cash in front of them, and we could see them go right back. But when they say, you know what, I don't want to live this way anymore, because I know that there's a God in heaven that loves me and didn't create me to be hurt or harmed or like this, and that he has a life for me beyond this, then they have something to work for, and they'll do that work, and we'll see that change in their life. And we maybe have to model that through why we're here, and doing that. And one of the things that's been really beneficial is we've had those victims that became, and I don't call them survivors anymore, I call them conquerors, because they really kicked that situation in the butt. But we have our conquerors that have made a video and said, hey, I know that this situation right now is super scary, and I was sitting there with you, but Maddie and Pastor Rudy and the rest of the team are here because they love Jesus, and Jesus is going to teach them how to help you through this situation, and we're all going to work through this. So giving them the gospel is going to outweigh anything that we see or give or have at that moment. And so we have Bibles that we give them that are put together by our Pain for Princess team that are pretty phenomenal, that the Holy Spirit has spoken through that. And sometimes we have these artists that draw pictures of the girls when we give them the Bibles. And we've had these pictures that are hand drawn that look exactly like the girl that we just recovered, not even knowing. And that's what the Holy Spirit did. And they just break down in tears. They have their guidebook on how to survive, because now they've gone from being a conqueror, and now they're going to survive the civilian world past that. And they've got all the answers are right there. Even if they can't get a hold of us, they can call upon the Lord. So that's really the most important part for us.
Yeah.
Thanks, Pastor. And we're at time, so I need to wrap up. Respect everyone for being here, but I mean, you hit the nail on the head, Pastor Rudy, that it's those intrinsic motivators, right? Like, we can be the external thing that removes somebody from that situation, but we cannot motivate, we cannot change the heart. That is something that has to be a relationship with the survivor and their experiences. But we can create the path. That's what I love to say is we can't walk the path for somebody, but we can create the path so that it's there for them to walk. And I just appreciate you guys for all that you do. And to touch on what Ben said, another state that's done a really good job of that is Georgia, with their Receiving Hope Center, have a really great immediate response secure facility that is not a psych ward and it's not juvenile facilities, but which is what the need is. And so I thank you guys for being here. and for your work and for all the people that you serve, and like I've gotten to watch you guys care for them, whether they know you're there caring for them or not, with some of the intel that you do. So I appreciate just you guys and our people that joined us as attendees. Thanks for just being willing to hear hard things and hard conversations and do hard work. Thanks,
Bye.
guys.